Hello, North Central Washington, and welcome to Networked. I'm your host, Jenny Rojanasatian, and I'm so excited to be back in the studio with you today. If you've tuned into the NCW Life channel before, you've probably seen me on Guada TV, but we recently rebranded our TV show name to Networked. And while the name may have changed, the heart of our show is the same. Now, if you've never joined us before, let me first introduce myself. I serve as the Executive Director of NCW Tech Alliance, a nonprofit passionate about connecting people and technology resources. And on each episode of Networked, I get the opportunity to interview people and organizations who are leading innovation across the region. On today's episode, I've invited Martin Straub, owner of SimplePowerIT, to share about his business as well as cybersecurity tips for individuals, small businesses, and nonprofits. Please don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this commercial break. Well, welcome back to Networked. We are on air for two segments today with Martin Straub, founder of SimplePowerIT. So welcome back to the show, Martin.
Yeah, it's a little while ago that we were last on together. This is great.
Yes, it's really exciting to have you back on air. So great to be back in the studio filming. The pandemic has obviously changed everyone's world, but we're not going to go too much in the pandemic to start. Let's introduce you. I know for our audience just tuning in today, I'd love for you to share a little bit about your background, your career, before we dive into your company and what you're doing in cybersecurity.
Yeah, well, thanks. Thanks, Jenny. It's great, like I said, to be here. I guess we'll talk about the NCW board too, or NCW Tech board, because I recently rejoined that a year and a half ago, which is great. But which I was originally on 20 years ago when I moved to the Central Washington area. So prior to that, my career was over in the Puget Sound area, where I worked for not large and small businesses in mostly technology roles, but as it happened, also accounting roles.
Okay.
So sometimes I like to refer to myself as a retired accountant turned techie.
Yeah.
So that's been fun. I worked for businesses including like AT&T Wireless, a Columbia winery I worked for a while in the technology role back when I was on the Puget Sound area. And then when I moved over here, I worked for Cordell Nair & Company, managing their technology, but also working with some of their clients. And then about 8 or 9 years ago, started SimplePowerIT, drawing off all that sort of background I had.
Well, I never really thought about that. Your accountant with IT experience, those are both very much B2B business plays, and you get to work with a variety of clients. Yeah. So something's always new, I imagine. I'm kind of guessing IT might be a little bit more dynamic in the types of problems, but maybe I am wrong versus annual. Exactly.
Right,
my next guest will probably put me in my place
given all the annual regulations and stuff,
absolutely.
Or legislation. Right.
So you, with Cordell Nair, managed their IT services and then branched out to just fully do that full time in your own business.
Exactly.
Okay. So SimplePowerIT. What does your company do?
Yeah, so the easiest way to describe us is really as a turnkey technology solution provider. So meaning that we come into a business that we work with and we are their go-to. We're their IT department, essentially. Whether they need to buy new equipment and have it set up, need a server, they need training for their employees, they're considering purchasing new software, need help evaluating it. That's what we're there for. And typically we try to build a long-term relationship with our clients because the better that we understand what they do, both in their business and how they work with their technology, the better we are able to provide meaningful recommendations and fit the technology for their business.
And with the ever-changing needs of technology, it's not like it's a one and done, I imagine, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
You can't just set it up. There's always something new, new integration, new software.
Yeah.
Give us a kind of a little insight into the typical client range. Are you working with really large companies, small operators?
Yeah. We're equipped actually to work with businesses of any size. And some of that is based on the background I have and on our team, and that we all have experience working with both small and larger businesses. And so we understand the challenges that face both. There's budgetary constraints on one side, and then for a larger business, there might be more security concerns or more standardization they need in the way they roll out equipment. But I would say, for the most part, like a lot of this area, this region, our bread and butter clients are in that small to medium range. Maybe there's 10 employees or so, and some of them work in the office. Maybe a few are scattered in different places working from home nowadays. We'll probably talk about that a little bit more with COVID and such. And we also work with a lot of nonprofits. That was a specific area of focus for me when I started the business, and we continue to put a lot of emphasis on it. I've been on a lot of boards besides this NCW Tech, and over those years of working on boards, I've realized, nonprofits are particularly challenged sometimes in getting technology that is a good fit for them. I saw that as a board member, and I really wanted to try to help in a different role, in a different capacity, not just as a board member, but as a technology provider, help nonprofits better utilize technology. So
let's dive a little into that. We're on a newly rebranded show, Networked. It was Guada TV because our nonprofit was Guada since 1999, but newly rebranded to NCW Tech. You were a board member in the early Guada formation.
Yeah.
Yes, and then have rejoined us, which is really exciting as we navigate this new chapter. Tell us a little bit, building on that passion for nonprofits and technology. What are some of the things that you have, I guess, seen recently with nonprofits and some of the challenges they're facing?
Well, I don't know that what we've seen with nonprofits is necessarily unique to that segment, but I think and I get this question a lot, is, how have things changed as a result of COVID? And I think we saw it more actually with our nonprofits asking this question, though, because nonprofits tend to be a little more bootstrappy with their technology budgets sometimes.
Or non-existent.
Probably, right? They just make do with what they have. And so for a lot of them, that meant they had never really even thought of the possibility of people working from different locations as much. There was more, either they were so small that they were just working out of a home, their home, or they had an office that was just, cobbled together, desks and things like that. And everyone just worked out of the office. And then with COVID, of course, there was much more of an emphasis on, hey, how do we let our employees work from other places? Because they still have this passion for the organization and the mission, but we typically, they have a very small office. Potentially they're working in closer quarters. And so they wanted a lot of help trying to, transition to a place where they could work more remotely and still get their, their missions, serve their mission. But we don't work with as many of nonprofits in the arts, but that's like a whole nother conversation, of course, where they really have had to transition to how do they provide their arts, particularly, like stage media or things like that in a way through the pandemic. But I think certainly that has been the recurring theme of the remote work. And how do we accommodate that, particularly in an organization that maybe didn't have a lot of consistency in how they were using their technology prior to COVID, and trying to put some more consistency to it so that the remote work worked the same for all the employees and was secure.
Yeah, I think, nonprofits, you mentioned it, the bootstrap nature of nonprofits and the growth. I mean, we've seen that within our organization. Started with just active board members, and then eventually, after 16 years, built up capacity to have staff and then staff grow from there. And so, processes across the board are usually kind of the last to come down the line, let alone in technology. And security, we're going to dive really heavily into cybersecurity, but maybe as a teaser before we get into that segment, are nonprofits at risk?
Sure. In terms of, I mean, when we talk more about cybersecurity, we'll like you said, dive into that. But really, there's not anyone who isn't at risk nowadays. The way I term it is cybersecurity and the threats are really, it's an economy now. I mean, there's so many opportunists out there looking for any type of chance they have to either get at an organization's data or their checkbook, essentially, puts them at risk. And because everything is interconnected nowadays, we do everything online. There's not a single person really who isn't at risk unless you're, living completely off the grid in the mountains someplace with no internet connectivity, which really doesn't describe just about anyone anymore. So
we're all on the web in some capacity.
Right. And in some ways, I would say nonprofits are sometimes more at risk because they're not as familiar with what to look for. And so their guard is down a little bit more than, say, a business who say, oh, we have really important data, so we've put an emphasis on cybersecurity. We've trained our employees. Whereas a nonprofit, it's probably the last thing on their mind in some cases because their mission is so important, and that's what all their attention is, as it should be. But unfortunately, nowadays you really need to put some emphasis on cybersecurity, or it's just a matter of time when you'll have some sort of something exposed.
Well, we've got to head to a commercial break. When we get back, Martin Straub and I are going to dive into cybersecurity, a relevant issue, as he talked about, really across the board for everyone. So don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Networked. We are on air with Martin Straub from SimplePowerIT. We just kind of covered, Martin, your background, career, and we were just touching into cybersecurity. It's a topic you and I covered a couple years ago here on what was Guada TV, now is Networked, here on Networked. But unfortunately, cybersecurity problems aren't going anywhere, right?
No, in fact, they're getting worse.
Yes.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about cybersecurity. What does that entail? I think that's a word that's used a lot, but people may not know what is this. What is cybersecurity?
Well, it's actually interesting because the word cybersecurity wasn't even like part of our vocabulary maybe 5 years ago. Yeah. We used more like viruses and malware. Yeah. And so now we've coined the term cybersecurity, really, which is this encompassing term that means all these different types of threats that are that we're exposed to, whether we're a business or an individual, whether we're on the internet, using QuickBooks software, using our bank account, on our phone app, really, it used to be that when we thought of cyber threats, we thought of getting it was really a problem if we got a virus on our computer, or even some people said, oh, you can get a virus on your phone, or you can't get it on a Mac. We'd have these conversations about, oh, Mac is safer than a PC. And that has all shifted now, where that's like the least of our concerns in some regards. It's not about getting a virus. It's about really two things, I would say, is about social engineering threats, where people are trying to social engineer their way into our lives or into our networks or into our passwords, because then they get access to things that might be opportunities for them to abscond money from us as a person or as a business. And then there's also the whole thought of network vulnerabilities, which is a more technical conversation. But businesses in particular need to be worried about any network vulnerabilities they might have, because they have a whole network that's exposed to the internet, and a hacker might take advantage of that.
Well, and we used to operate so much more, especially in the office environment. I think about, you had your work computer, which was usually like a desktop. Right. You weren't really taking devices home from the office. Right. And you were coming in, and it had a virus software. So you were.
That's all. Thought that's all you needed was
that's all you needed.
Software. You were good to go.
Yes.
Oh, my threats are up to date. I'm good to, or my threat definitions are up to date. I'm good to go.
And you could set the same password for about 6 years.
Yep. Right. Set it and forget it.
Yes. And then be done with it. But it's really the cloud and the way we do business has completely changed.
The interconnected nature of everything. Yeah. And so much of our work is now done through email exchanges, and not even having a live conversation with a person. That thieves have really taken advantage of that fact that they count on people, to have these trust relationships that are based on the digital world, as opposed to worse in the past. A lot more of our business was done by phone or in person, and particularly with COVID, we do more and more of that. And so that makes us ripe for digital threats, really.
And who's getting targeted? Let's kind of talk about breakdown in terms of individuals and businesses. Maybe starting with individuals. What does that look like for an everyday citizen here in North Central Washington?
I chuckled because it's more of a question of who isn't getting targeted. Because I would say that really the cyber threats it's sort of an indiscriminate economy now. And I think if I back up a step, one of the ways you can look at it is a lot of the threats actually do come from outside the United States. And part of the reason for that is because the economies are not as robust in other countries. And so there's this massive opportunity, and because we have an interconnected world, there's this massive opportunities to target people, because it's a good way to make a living. So if we think about that, or if you think like a criminal who can get at any computer from anywhere, potentially, you can see that really anyone is a potential victim. And I think really what a lot of the hackers, if you want to call them that, have realized is that using social engineering is the best way into someone, it's the best way to target someone. And so for an individual, a lot of times that means, hey, how can I trick this person into giving up their password to important places? Because as soon as I have a password, I might have the keys to the castle. One example I like to give is if an individual has their like Gmail account compromised, pretty much a hacker can be off and running just with that one piece of information, because they can make some assumptions that, well, 80% of the people either bank with, Chase, Capital One, or some of the bigger institutions, so they can go to that website, do a password reset request, which goes into their Gmail account.
Which they're now controlling the email.
Which they now control. And so guess what's happening? I mean, it doesn't take a whole lot of steps to realize, next thing you know, they're into then your banking account, into your banking account online. And they're making transfer requests or other things. And, so it's kind of scary when you think about it that way. It doesn't take a whole lot, really.
And I think we've seen on the national landscape, especially in terms of politics, about hackers and, are they getting into elections or into major corporations?
Those are good examples, right.
And then I think it also makes it feel very distant from the everyday user.
Right.
Like, what is my income worth? They're not going to be coming after me, but they very much are.
Right.
Like you said, it's non-discriminatory. It's not just the big.
They're not targeting. It's a numbers game.
Okay.
So if I'm a hacker and I want to have a good day at the office, let me send out, how many phishing emails can I send out today? If I send out 10,000, if only 2 people fall for it, and and it's a fact that each person I get $1,000, and I'm living in Eastern Europe someplace. That's a pretty good payday. So again, it's a numbers game. It's a numbers game,
and it's probably quick for them to send those phishing emails.
It's quick, right? Because there's so many great tools available to be able to do that.
And what is a phishing email?
What is a phishing email? Right?
What is a phishing email?
Phishing email is sort of the most basic social engineering threat, or the most common, I should say, not basic, common social engineering threat that we see nowadays, which is essentially sending an email that is not from the actual sender that it looks to be, and it's attempting to trick the person into typically clicking on something that is a fraudulent link that goes to a place that asks them to give up their password. I mean, that's the most common type of phishing email. So phishing is, it's spelled with a PH, and it's like trying to trick someone.
Because they're trying to pull them,
lure them in.
Yes.
Typically with a fake. The email itself is harmless.
Yeah.
It's the link or the content, and a lot of times it's like, oh, you have a secure document. We need to get your secure document. We need your email and password, and we'll show you that. And most often, the social engineered in a way to really think that you have to act on it in a hurry. Either your data is at risk, you're getting a refund, there's something really important about this email.
And these are all great examples. I'm sure all of us watching, I know I have. You get those emails where it might come from a familiar name. It says Martin Straub, but then I look at the email and it's
maybe a different
very,
address,
very different.
Yeah. Or sometimes it's the same. That's the thing. That they've gotten very clever in how they
at masking it.
Yes, they have.
Now, what is it? Let's shift over to business. Can you tell maybe some examples, maybe even local, if you have any, of what has a attack been like on a business, and how has it impacted businesses?
So again, thinking like if you think like a hacker again, they're looking for opportunities to either get data from an organization, because if they get data, they can hold that data hostage for ransom, or they're trying to just extort dollars from business, and that might be through ransomware, which I think many of us who follow the news have seen examples of. The ones that have made the news are the big examples. Lots of other ones have not made the news. But as a business, you have a lot more exposure in different ways, because typically you have more funds available to you. You're doing transactions with people online. We had an example of a client that we worked with. It was a really clever example because there were 2 exposures that happened. Okay. One is that they had an email compromise. So a hacker got access to their email. They didn't know that it had happened, and this is where the clever part comes in. The hacker didn't reveal themselves right away. What they did is they actually what we understood happened is they searched through the email and understood that this client had a transactional relationship with another vendor that they actually did wire transferring typically with. And so what they did is they created a new domain that was just off by one letter, and they had a new email trade set up with this client. And they said, oh, my bank account number has changed. So for your next payment, be sure to change the routing number to blah, blah, blah. And it looked exactly like an email from the person they normally do business with. They had copied the email signature because they had gotten access to the email before. And all they did is change one letter in the domain, which you would never know to look at. And
we're so busy. You're just
right. Well, and there's nothing, and no good filtering email is going to catch that because it's a legitimate domain, and that's pretty common threat nowadays too. Is a business's domain, a hacker will buy just a slight permutation on that domain. So, like if you're Microsoft.com, they might buy Microsofts.com. I'm just using an example. There's what I'm calling one out locally, but and then send emails from that domain, and people don't, and if they use all the logos and they use a signature that looks similar, that's the last thing you typically, you just see it, our eyes don't see every letter typically.
Very clever.
Yeah, it was very clever. And they ended up losing money, unfortunately, in that situation.
And like you said, the ransom piece. So then they're holding them hostage, right? Until they pay a fee.
They pay a fee, and sometimes then even not, right?
Then come in.
Yeah.
Well, we have prepared. I know you prepared some tips today for the audience, including password tips. So let's look at this. You just talked about in that example, they got in through the email.
Right.
So why are we're all, I think, get a little annoyed at the prompts to change your password, but it's important.
Right.
So
it's important, and I would say one of the things that people ask most often is, should we change our password frequently? And I would say more important than changing passwords frequently is using unique passwords at all the different sites, which is even more of an annoyance because you got to keep track of all those. But it's the thing that offers you a lot of protection because one password isn't keys to all your different places that you use.
You don't want it to be cat 1, 2, 3 at every single
place, because if they get it once, then again they're relying on, hey, you probably bank with so and so. Let me try it there. And then the other most important tip we have is using multi-factor authentication, which is probably a whole conversation into itself. But I think a lot of us are familiar with it because it's the norm now at a lot of the banking institutions in particular. You can't just log in with a password anymore.
You have to go through a couple layers.
Right, and which is the most important thing because it relies on using your phone or some other thing other than just a password to get in. So I encourage people to, anything that's important, make sure that there's a second layer of protection before you can get to that information online.
And I think there was one more personal tips that we have today to share out just in general as far as protections. We talked about the email passwords.
Right. Yeah, another tip that I often give, which dropping down to the very last thing, this is more of a general in nature, but I really encourage people to lock their credit reports nowadays. And I heard recently, someone added onto that where they suggested even locking the credit reports of your children, particularly those under 18, because it's very commonplace now where a hacker will, if they get a social security number, they can use that to create a fake identity, and the child doesn't know about it until they first go apply for credit when they reach a certain age. And as much as it is a pain, just like passwords are a pain, there are 3 major credit agencies, and in about 10 minutes with each of them, either online or an 800 number, you can lock that credit report, and it provides you a world of protection against identity theft, which if you've ever talked to anyone who's had identity theft, they would have told you, man, I wish I would have done that.
Take the time to get protected.
Yeah.
Well, Martin, we barely scratched the surface because it's such a robust topic, but thank you.
NCW Tech Alliance has served as our regional hub for technology innovation. As a 501c3, their nonprofit mission is to connect people and technology resources to create a thriving community. You can network with the team and guests from today's show by visiting them at www.ncwtech.org.